hasn't attended any meetings yet. Could I ask that we write to Democratic Services in Dudley and just ask if, you know, if Councillor Rogers is particularly busy. I know he runs a business, so he may well have too many commitments to realistically commit to this meeting. If they could get somebody else, if they could have somebody else to attend, please, just so that all the Mets are fairly represented.
Yes, Chair, will do.
Thank you. Okay, so we will now move on then to item number 2 and any declarations of interest. None from anybody. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. I think it's fair to say that I sit on the board for Midland Connect.
Okay. We'll note that. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of October. As we run through, I'll take them for matters of accuracy first, and then we'll go on to any matters arising. But I only intend to pick up matters arising that don't fall anywhere else on the agenda. So, for example, if you've got any matters arising around the portfolio, the question time for Councillor Ward, we can pick those up on item 4 of the agenda. So to start with, for accuracy, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Okay, and now for any matters arising. So just raise your hand if you've got any matters arising from page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, and 5. So I see no matters arising. So can I have an acceptance that those were a true record of the meeting, please?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
agreed.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Clements. Just seen you've just joined us. So that does make us, I believe, quorate now. Tanya?
Yes, Chair, just to confirm you are quorate now.
Lovely. Excellent. Okay, then, so we have, if we can move on then with the agenda to item number 4, and that's the response to recommendations that we made at our last meeting for the portfolio lead for transport. So we've had a written response from Councillor Ward, which you'll all have had a chance to have a look at. And if anybody's got any questions or any issues they want to raise from that, we do have Laura Schoaf, Director for Transport for West Midlands, with us, who can perhaps answer any questions that might arise. So if I throw it open to the committee, has anybody got any matters arising from that meeting that they'd like to raise under this issue, this item?
Not from me, Chair.
No, nothing from any, no? I think the only thing I'd like to pick up on was, let me just flick through. It was response number 3, which was, oh, sorry, there we go. Response number 3 about lobbying government. So our recommendation was the Combined Authority and Transport for West Midlands should consider undertaking a programme of appropriate lobbying in support of the levelling up of funding for public transport services and infrastructure. And I think when we raised it, I felt that it was more about political lobbying than Transport for West Midlands lobbying. So I think just to make that clear. Anything from anybody else? Laura, is there any comment you'd like to make?
No, except I probably would say that we should and try to lobby at every level on the levelling up agenda. It's at the foremost of our minds, and obviously there was some announcement in the comprehensive spending review about some funding around the leveling up agenda. So there's been, I think it's 4.2 billion, billion announced nationally, I think, for a leveling up fund, which will need to be bid into, but obviously we'll be considering that as the detail comes out about what that means. But just in terms of that wider leveling up agenda, there's been now some national progress towards putting some funding in place.
Thanks, Laura. I can see Kashmir. You'd like to make a comment, Kashmir?
Yeah, just to say that funding, I'm sure I very much hope and expect, I'm guessing TFWM will very much put in for, and it will be very interesting, and hopefully, fingers crossed, there'll be some funding out of that. And obviously, just to notice, we're having seen this morning, in fact, that the potential of the Department for Transport setting up a second base in Birmingham, if the rumours around Whitehall are true, I certainly think help the combined authorities' cause in terms of it, and would be a good step in terms of them being able to directly and more closely lobby ministers. So fingers crossed that turns out to be the case. And I think Ian's response on the whole is extremely comprehensive. And just as I also thank you for the meeting at the 3 weeks ago, Laura, with myself and my YCA colleague Assad. It's a really good, I think, laid a really good foundation for good collaborative working during this year.
Thanks, Kashmir. And yeah, I think just to add into that, in terms of the forward planning for this committee, that we will be doing that deep dive will be set up and will feature further into the next year's work plan to look at the alternative ticketing policies that was a recommendation from that meeting. So thank you everybody for that, and thank you, Laura, for dropping in this morning. If you want to stay on, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, I know you've got an extremely busy schedule, but thank you again. So if we move on then with the agenda, so item number 5, and this is from page 19 in your packs, and I'm going to hand over to David Harris, who will take us through the slide presentation. David.
Good morning. Thank you, Councillor Baton. I'm just going to share my screen, if I may. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good. I'm having a few Wi-Fi issues, so I apologise in advance if some of the changeover is a bit slow. But just shout at me if I seem to be talking to the wrong slide from your perspective. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview and background as to sort of some of the work we've been doing and kind of where we think we might be going with regards to developing a new West Midlands local transport plan, and just sort of have a conversation with the committee around that, really. So local transport plan is a statutory public document, and essentially it sets out the local transport authority's policies, strategies and objectives for improving transport in our local communities. And the local transport plan is an important document. As I alluded to there, it's statutory. So it is the most important transport document that the region has. It then informs not only the sort of regional transport policies, but it should then inform the policies of each local authority within the combined authority as well. It has a clear kind of relationship with land use and placemaking. It helps us set and develop our capital funding priorities in terms of the money that we think we need to take forward a range of both infrastructure and revenue-led projects. And also it should help us set our goals and targets and monitor our progress against those as we go forward. And the little picture there are some of the earlier LTPs that you may recognise. And that's LTP 2 and 3, I think, there. And where we are now is we have Movement for Growth, which is our 4th local transport plan. And Movement for Growth was adopted in December 2015. And then that was subsequently supported by what we call the delivery plan, which sets out the implementation plans behind those documents. So hopefully you're all familiar with those documents. Movement for Growth has been really important to us. It's the first transport plan that the combined authority has had, setting out its plans, and it's helped us secure some of the money that we've had through the investment programme, and it's also helped to secure a range of additional funding, such as Transforming Cities Fund, housing deals, the Future Mobility Zone funding we've had, as well as a range of other funding streams that we've been able to make the case to government and others for to deliver our transport strategies. But we've started to go down the route of reviewing it now, and the statutory guidance suggests that we should review transport plans every 4 or 5 years. And on reflecting on where we've got to with Movement for Growth, we've seen an awful lot of change, all the way through some, obviously now we're a mayoral combined authority, but in that whole period we've seen things like Brexit becoming a thing, other changes in terms of local government funding, other types of partnerships that have evolved around us, but also the climate change and air quality crises that we've started to respond to, and of course the pandemic that we're in the middle of, and all of these are having sort of significant ramifications for how we think about and plan for transport. So, in kind of looking forward, we sort of look back a bit as well, just to understand sort of what's happening in the past and how that might drive some of what we might see in the future. And I think it's clear to see that we've seen a lot of change very, very quickly, perhaps not so much over the period of Movement for Growth, but even in the last 20, 30 years, transport has particularly continued to evolve. But in the last 50, 60 years, we've seen significant change in the way how we travel, particularly with the event of mass car ownership. And that's had some really positive things for society and our economy, but equally it's had some quite negative implications, and some of those are the things that we're kind of dealing with now. And the graph on the left sort of shows you sort of the relationship between our transport systems have improved, our digital communication systems have improved, and that purple line that goes up is essentially private car travel. And all the other lines are your bus and your train. And you can see that personal mobility and the amount of travel that we do because of the event of the car is quite significant and substantial, and something that we're still trying to sort of rationalise to this day. And whilst that's, as I say, been great, it's had other impacts. So perhaps 40 years ago, we stayed far more locally, and we shopped in a much more sort of local sense and travelled a lot less. And now we're kind of shopping at big supermarkets, and we'll drive a lot more, and we travel a lot more than perhaps we did. And whilst technology has evolved as well, it will not fix all of our problems going forward. And we will need to think about how we kind of rationalise some of that behaviour that we have around personal mobility, and the need to sort of address some of those impacts that we have that the transport system produces. So just to sort of dig into that a bit more, some of the things we see are that car and motoring has got cheaper, whilst public transport and other forms of transport have got increasingly more expensive in comparison. Car ownership has continued to go up, and whilst we'll see in a moment, the car ownership has gone up, but there's still a large number of people in the West Midlands that don't have access to the car, and that's really important. And we have to sort of just bear that in mind. And within that, there's an impact of sort of, we've seen cars evolve from things like minis, quite small, through to modern day SUVs, which obviously are bigger, take up more road space, and have a greater carbon footprint. And that's clearly a challenge as well, because whilst internal combustion engines may have got us slightly more efficient, some of the savings and benefits have been offset by them being bigger cars, and that creates in itself a new challenge. And it's also just worth reflecting on that a lot of our policies and strategies have been very much focused on sort of trips into centres, and trying to manage congestion overall, particularly thinking about morning and afternoon PM peak journeys. which is it's fine. It does address some of the issues, but there are some sort of trends that we just need to kind of keep an eye on, in that car usage has sort of gone up. And whilst we've got some really good stories going into some of our key centres, and particularly Birmingham, where public transport is largely, the majority of the mode share, some of our other centres it's not quite so positive. And we're seeing, bus usage decline. And whilst we are seeing positive shifts towards rail and also the metro and working from home, but overall of the kind of behaviours that we're seeing, they're still quite small. And some of the trips that we've got on the network, we need to tackle those as much as we do the ones going into the centres, because with things like carbon, it's every trip at any time that is an issue, rather than just the ones that are happening at particular times. And that little pie chart really does sort of drive that home, really, in the AM peak, only 15% of all of traffic is going into centres in the AM peak pre-COVID, and that 85%, 86% are those trips that aren't necessarily destinating in those key centres and don't necessarily have an obvious public transport alternative. And going forward, we'll need to think about how we might manage some of those trips more effectively, try and help us tackle the carbon emissions. So, are we heading in the right direction? We're doing some really good things. There's clearly Movement for Growth and the delivery plan are putting investment into our mass transit network and other parts of the transport system that desperately needed it. And we are seeing some targeted improvements in some key locations. But essentially, going back to that previous slide, some of the changes we need to make, particularly around carbon emissions, we're not tackling. So we need to think about how do we deal with some of those other trips? We need to think about how we might tackle inequalities, and I'll come on to some of those issues in a moment. And we don't just need to sort of make sure congestion doesn't get any worse. We need to think about different ways of reducing congestion in a way that is equitable and meets our carbon targets. So as we've developed the LTP, we've been looking at 5 key areas for why we would want to make changes to the way we plan, manage and deliver the transport system at the moment. I'll go through each of these in turn in a moment. But essentially, at the front and centre stage is tackling the climate emergency. And as members will recall, last year the Combined Authority declared a climate emergency, and we published our WM 2041 strategy, which set out a desire for the CA area to be carbon neutral by 2041. Now, it's just worth reflecting within that. To do that, obviously there's quite a challenging approach that needs to be taken, and transport is one of the biggest, if not the biggest source, and particularly road transport, that we need to tackle. And cars and then freight and HGVs and LGVs are the biggest contributors within those. Now, it would be perfect if the shift towards ultra low emission or zero emission vehicles was the panacea and could solve our problems. But unfortunately, it's not, because electrification, some of the benefits from electrification don't actually kick in until later. And therefore, we need to do other things initially to try and help us stay within those targets. And we can explore those, and ultimately that will be a decision for politicians as to what we can do. But there are things that we might be able to do in the next few years that could help us with some of those issues. The next motive we've called creating a fairer society, and this is just reflecting on the fact that the transport system, despite best efforts, still creates inequality, and that inequality comes through in 2 ways. That's inequality of access. So, for example, someone who has access to a car can access an order of jobs, a magnitude of jobs by 45 minutes by car, far greater than someone who solely has access via public transport. And that's clearly, an issue for us if we are serious about inclusive growth, then we need to think about how do we make sure that the opportunity for people in the West Midlands is as equal as possible for those who do have a car and against those who don't. And I think it's also then just worth reflecting on that the equity of impacts of the transport system are also not equal. So people who live in our more deprived and vulnerable communities are more likely to suffer the adverse impacts of the transport system far greater than those who live in the more affluent communities. And so from that, I mean, the impacts of air quality are generally felt harder in some of our more deprived communities, but also things like road safety and severance tend to impact those more deprived communities more severely. Our next motive for change is around becoming healthier and more active. We have what is, in essence, a bit of a health crisis in the West Midlands. We have high levels of obesity and childhood obesity and various other health-related issues, which are partly due to sedentary lifestyles. People not walking, cycling, being active as much as they might be. And transport and our approach and behaviour and relationship with transport can help change that if we plan for it and manage it in the right way. And even, increasing people's public transport use would actually improve the amount of active travel that people do because of the first and last mile and people walking to bus stops or stations at either end of their journey rather than just coming out of their house and getting in a car, for example. And part of the challenge there is around sort of making sure that we have places that people want to spend time in and want to do some of those activities in. And that leads me into our next motive of change, which is around supporting places and communities. And what we've tended to do, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is in the last 40 years, we've seen a change in our relationship with places, driven by sort of our ability to travel further away and work further away from home. So we spend less time locally. We don't shop as local as we might have done. And at the same time, our streets have sort of been somewhat taken over with parked cars. They feel less safe. And therefore, people aren't as comfortable with walking and cycling in their local areas and taking some of their journeys by those things because of the perception of, they're over trafficked or there's cars parked over the pavements and those sorts of things. And we see this as a really important step to sort of thinking about things like 20-minute neighbourhoods and reimagining local areas and supporting that kind of, as we come out of COVID, people not working away from home quite so much, shopping and living locally, and thinking about how do we reimagine some of our local areas so they're not just so dominated by transport, but people enjoy them as spaces that they want to sort of spend more time in, and then enabling them to do more sort of physical activity and reducing the overall amount of trips that they make. And then finally, our final motive is around sustainable economic success. And again, this is kind of two-sided. What we've tended to do, and this isn't just regionally, but sort of nationally, transport and economy are quite interlinked. And as we've got economic growth, we all get increasingly more wealthy. And part of that is our sort of desire to travel and spend money on transport and mobility. And that then generates more trips. It also generates more kind of movements by freight and goods and so on. And what we then see is that capacity fills up. So our infrastructure we do have becomes busier, we have congestion, and increasingly what we tend to do is add more supply, more capacity into our transport networks, which then as the economy continues to go fills up, and we're in this kind of vicious cycle. So we do need to try and break that because there is only so much infrastructure ultimately we can provide. And also so much that we can afford. And clearly coming out the back of the pandemic, we'll need to think about how we use that infrastructure that we already have in the most effective way, because there's likely to be, again, kind of less funding for new infrastructure going forward. But also with the sort of a climate change lens on that, we have to think about the fact that the cost of maintaining infrastructure that we have, be that new or existing infrastructure, could increase because of the impacts and adapting to the impacts of climate change. On the flip side of that motive as well is thinking about using transport policy and transport strategy to shape and influence our economy to our own advantage. We're already a sort of a leader nationally in terms of future mobility. We have some of the advanced manufacturing. We're leading around things like the Gigafactory and autonomous vehicles. And we can use this to sort of champion some of those innovative technologies that can help address some of the issues that I've set out and those other motives of change, and particularly around climate change and decarbonising our transport system. So we have quite, I don't think it's mission impossible, but it is quite challenging. And with the targets that we've set ourselves in WM 2041, if we don't start thinking about how we address some of the issues, and particularly around transport, then we will burn through that carbon budget very, very quickly within the next 7 years. And as I sort of alluded to, ultra low emission vehicles, zero emission vehicles are part of the solution, but they're not all of the solution. So we'll need to think about other things that we can do to try and decarbonise or reduce the amount of carbon emissions from our transport system. And I think it's also worth sort of reflecting there that it's not always just the transport solution that we need to think about. And I've put on the right there the sort of triple access system. So physical mobility is sometimes part of the solution, and overcoming sort of the physical barriers of being able to sort of access things is clearly something that we still need to think about. But actually spatial proximity and making sure that people don't have to travel so far for some of the key things they need to access, be that healthcare, education, but also employment is critical. And then also the sort of the third part is digital connectivity. And increasingly, I showed that graph earlier, and we've seen that digital comms have continued to improve as sort of our use of personal mobility in the transport system has increased as well. And I think we're at that kind of point now where we can see that there are real opportunities for digital connectivity to add value to what we do and how we live our lives. We're having this scrutiny committee via in the internet now. Going forward, the pandemic, I think, has shown us that there are greater opportunities to change some of our behaviours so that we don't have to travel so much to have some of these kind of meetings or for our daily work going forward. So as we start to think about LTP5, these are the kind of things that we're going to have to think about. So there's a short-term piece around how far can we go with reducing some of our need to travel, be that through things like land use or through digital connectivity, but also through innovative ways of travel and thinking about, you know, the e-scooter trials and other things that we're piloting in the West Midlands, such as mobility credits and so on, that could help us change the way people think about travel and move around the West Midlands. Into the longer term, clearly land use and land use policies won't change overnight, but it is something that I think collectively we'll need to think about. And we'll need to continue thinking about our mass transit networks and our public transport system, because COVID has clearly affected those. Patronage may not ever be what it was pre-COVID, but we still need our public transport network, and we'll still need to continue to improve that. So we need to think about what kind of mass transit system we need and what the other parts of that transport system need to do to support it going forward. So one of the key things that's going to be really important for us as we develop and then implement a new transport plan is the role of people and how we engage with them, because there's going to be some difficult choices to be made and some difficult conversations. And ultimately part of this is getting people to understand some of the issues that we're raising, but also for us to understand some of the challenges that people face with trying to adapt and change in light of some of these difficult scenarios. And I think we can all look back on some of the consultations and engagement that we've done previously and learn lessons from those. And that's what we're trying to do as we go forward. And what we've been trying to do already as we've developed our thinking around the new transport plan is using sort of online deliberative engagement with online communities to try and reflect better and understand better people's views much more with granularity that we wouldn't normally get through the sort of standard kind of engagement that we get. And whilst absolutely we only used 40 odd people this time, but it's important to reflect that this was kind of representational of the people of the West Midlands and the sort of different mixed socioeconomic groups and demographic groups of our communities. And whilst some of this engagement, we can't do it at scale to across the whole West Midlands, but we can continue to do it and work with representational groups alongside the other types of engagement we do to make sure that we're getting different levels of feedback and engagement on some of these key issues. And what we did in developing the green paper that we're developing for the local transport plan was to play through some of these issues. So we talked to them about the motives for change that I've just gone through. We talked to them about certain things that we could do with a future transport system, how we might do some of those things. And then we explored those policy impasses to try and understand people's views around sort of some of the difficult things and how we might get some of that behaviour change. And I think it's clear that, you know, people are willing to engage. If we ask the right questions in the right way, then people do want to engage and they understand where we're trying to get to and are more kind of interested in some of the issues that we're trying to play through with them. And what we also did was we created a series of vignettes, and these were in the document that we went to CA board with back in July. And we talked to people about what they could see and hear and the sorts of places, and, you know, were these places important to them, and could they see themselves in these places with slightly different ways that the transport system might look in these kind of future visions. And people were really excited about it when they saw this. They could see that you know, their worlds weren't going to be massively different in a future transport system where we had to sort of make subtle changes to the way people will live their lives. So where we're at now is we want to start a conversation on transport in the West Midlands. And what we're proposing to do is early next year is publish what we've called a green paper that will just set out some of those key issues in more detail. So talk about the 5 motives for change, present various bits of evidence around what the key issues are, and then start to sort of suggest certain things that we could do going forward in the future. But it's not about proposing solutions at this stage. It is more about trying to start to get some information and feedback around people's views, so that at some point in 2021, we can go back to CA board and leaders and just have a conversation around what our new transport plan needs to look like and how best we can start to develop a transport system that is fit to tackle climate change. So at that point, I'll stop and happy to try and answer any questions.
Thanks very much, David, for that presentation. I think just to set the scene at this point of this obviously is a report it's an information item for us and for noting, but I think if members can have one eye to do we think as a committee that this local transport plan has any emissions to it? Do we think that at this point in time we can add any value by making suggestions that could be or maybe should be included at this point? So if I can ask members just to be mindful of thinking about that when they contribute. I've got Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, David, thank you very much for this comprehensive demonstration that you've just done. I'm really delighted, particularly from an equality perspective, that it's very, very inclusive. However, I think there is an omission here, if you don't mind me saying, and the omission is with regards to businesses and potential employers. You talk about people who do not have cars or private transport themselves being disadvantaged when it comes to jobs. So I believe we have to change the mindset of employers when they're perhaps shortlisting and looking at people for various positions, and perhaps be putting somewhere in their application forms or person specification or wherever, yeah, how whoever is invited to come for interview, whoever works in this establishment, that car parking will not be a priority to that individual, and to actually encourage them to use public transport. I just wondered what your thoughts would be on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think that's a valid point. I'm not necessarily sure that's something we can specify through the transport plan, but clearly sort of measures that we can do to sort of level up access for people will take us a long way towards that. Clearly, there are things that set elsewhere in the transport planning system around sort of access and how we enable access to developments and businesses. But it's not necessarily for the transport plan to be that prescriptive around those things. But I think we can start to take a step forward if we start to show that we need to plan the transport system better to level up and make transport access more equitable across the region.
Jackie, did you want to come back in on that response?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It probably sounds a bit dictatorial to say it the way that I've just said it. You know, obviously there's people with disabilities that might need to have to use a car and to get easier access into buildings. I think for me, it's about changing the mindset. Just like we've got issues to do with ethnicity in the workplace, disability in the workplace, whereas employers, you would expect them to actually advertise that all people from different parts of society are welcome to apply for this job. It's kind of like throwing it out in that way, a blanket approach that, you know, we are actually encouraging you to use public transport. There's got to be a way around that, David.
Okay, noted.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the following order, I've got Councillor Hawkins, Councillor Bateman, and then Cashmere from the Young Combined Authority. So Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Dave, for the presentation. It's yeah, I just wanted to just concentrate on the supporting places, communities, and I hear a lot what Jackie says. You know, and I support that. But from Cellular's perspective, I know I say it myself in supporting development, we do focus on employment to the benefit of the region. Certainly, you know, with our commercial, you know, our road networks, the M40, M42. Again, comes back to the focus on the car then. But I just wondered if this document has enough in it about in supporting places and communities about planning and development for both businesses and communities, and does it play a big enough part to ensure that, you know, the design of the new communities and business parks, or do they have clear strategies to ensure that there are transport links, certainly public transport links, and things like active travel? Are there enough? Is there enough focus on that for employment, recreation, and commercial development? Thank you.
Thanks, David. Do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Yes, absolutely agree. And the purpose of where we are at the moment isn't, as I said, to sort of jump to solutions. It is to highlight some of those issues. And we know that clearly sort of where we have built things in the past has caused issues. People aren't as close as they could be. And if we're not building things close to where people want to access them, then there is a tendency that they will, you know, have to use a car. And then we're kind of locked into those kind of behaviours. It's not necessarily the role of the transport plan to dictate planning policy, but it is a tool for us to influence and raise those kind of concerns. I think that's where we are, particularly with the Green Paper, is an opportunity to highlight some of those challenges and sort of discuss with members and also officers in sort of local planning authorities, what some of the challenges are and how best we might solve those. The transport plan itself won't necessarily have all the answers to those, and some of the actual answers sit within individual authorities' planning policies. But as I say, this is an opportunity for us to sort of ask questions and challenge some of those policies going forward.
Councillor Bateman.
First of all, I've done a few LTPs in my time, but I have to say I very much like the approach that this one's taking. I like the idea of the green paper going alongside it as well. I think the big issue for all of us is whether we like it or whether we don't. The pandemic has changed people's minds and thoughts about a whole range of things, not just the local politicians, but also people sitting in their homes today, you know, pondering what they're going to do over the next week and how they're going to do it, and are they ever going to go back and deliver the life they had 5 years ago on a day when Facebook pops up a thing and shows them this is what you were doing 5 years ago. So I think the overall thrust of the document is good. I'm more impressed in the fact that we seem to be taking on board, as politicians in the area, the change that's required, that's being led by Paris. You know, that in itself, the fact that we're talking about it and how we can go about it, the public haven't quite woken to this yet, but they will, as we will all have to. And we all favour and savour our local areas that we live. All of us know it needs to be better. All of us want that to be better first. And so having the argument being set out and requesting the conversation to go with it from all the various aspects is a really, really good step forward. LTPs, by their nature, are hard to deliver. They're hard to deliver and to understand in some places. And I hate the fact that we've got this pandemic. But if it's doing anything at all, it's making us think perhaps the indefensible. All of us perhaps sitting around here at the table will be living on estates where we have judged our success to be in the way our children have delivered on their educations and have stepped forward and have made lives different from that of ourselves and the grandparents. How do you manage that? People manage it, as they tell me, with pride. They've got 3 or 4 cars at home. At the same time, they're telling me, how can I park them without the local authority taking up the grass verges and that? It's going to make us think. And it's going to make us think in a way, perhaps, that we haven't thought of before. I remember going on the county council to Japan once, where we were talking about all the requirements we need about inward investment. And during the conversation, it came up that the Japanese then, 30 years ago, couldn't own a car before they had the car parking space. And I said to JT Wilson from Dudley at the time, who's going to go and knock the door and tell them that? And we laughed and we shrugged our shoulders and walked away. We're in inches, I would suggest, in some places in the UK of having to make those sort of decisions. So I welcome the approach that's being taken. I think it's a really good document. I love the way it's being put together. The opportunity to talk. Our towns and our cities like Wolverhampton are having to look at the city centre and change its ideas on retail to that of leisure. It's come at the right time. You've hit the right note. I'll say no more than that, but you know, and it gives us a lot of opportunity as looking after the combined authorities' transport solutions to have a big say in going forward on almost any matter that we would like to focus on. It's
Thank
good.
you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Bateman. So I'll take Kashmir next, then Liz, and then I'll draw this item to a close. So Kashmir.
Thank you, Chair. Can I first of all say that this, I think, is a very good start in terms of the development of the plan. I said I think the approach in terms of as much participation as possible in its development, as well as then obviously what's been outlined already. I think it lays the groundwork very nicely in terms of being able to get it right, knowing of the unbelievable number of challenges that there are, not just as has been mentioned through COVID, but obviously the climate emergency and so forth. And just to say, I'm pretty sure, first of all, that my young combined authority colleagues would very much be happy to be involved within that process of pulling things together. Just a couple of, I think, points for me, and I think and first of all, definitely agree with Councillor Taylor's point that and being a person with autism, I know what it's felt like travelling on public transport sometimes, and it being a bit of a nightmare. And where I would be very interested to see what is stated within the report as to ensuring that accessibility is there for everybody. You know, and it can be quite a pain sometimes for folks with disabilities to have as big as access as possible. Or just as well as that, I'm just wanted to know to see, in terms of obviously the announcement a couple of weeks, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, in terms of the banning of petrol and diesel car sales in 2035, in terms of how medium term wise that will affect some of the thinking in and around the plan. And as well as that, one thing that did jump out to mind, and maybe in my sense a bit of a gap, is actually in terms of major events. Obviously with Birmingham 22 coming at us very quickly, those kind of events I think hopefully will be as common with the investment and stuff that's coming into the region. I'm curious to know as to how thinking in and around say big things such as say a Commonwealth Games will be incorporated into such a plan. As I say, I think the groundwork is good. Looking forward to seeing how it all develops, and it will be, I think there is a good chance of real consensus right across the board here for this to be an extremely good bit of work.
Thanks, Kashmir. David, do you want to comment on those points from Kashmir?
Thank you, Kashmir. Appreciate the feedback. With regard to big events, yes, absolutely right. They're important. Clearly, we're in the process of developing the Commonwealth Games strategy at the moment. I think that's down for a future scrutiny agenda for discussion. I think we will be looking at what comes out of that and how we can draw upon some of the thinking that's coming forward in the Games strategy into the wider strategy as we go forward.
Thanks. And finally, Councillor Clements. Are you muted, Liz? We can't hear you, Liz. Councillor Clements? Councillor Clements, we can't hear you. Okay, do you want to pop your question into the chat bar or into an email, and we can perhaps pick it up, because we're not able to get any sound from you? No, can't. Can we take your question, Liz? Okay, I think she's leaving. I think she must have a Wi-Fi problem. So I'm going to ask Councillor Clements if she will put her question through either in the chat bar later for David to pick it up, or via email if she's not able to rejoin the call. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I think, just sort of summing up broadly. Hello. Oh, Liz, are you back?
Yes, I'm having some broadband problems. Can I still say something?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just to echo everyone's compliments to David about the scope and the ambition of this document. I think it's really welcome, and it's the way that we need to be going. I mean, I have some concerns having heard the overall briefing on the combined authorities budget situation on Friday about how how the financial constraints may end up constraining our ability to deliver this vision, and I'm quite worried about that. And I'm sure we'll come on to that later on in the agenda. I do have some concerns though when we're talking about the connection between transport and our climate change responsibilities and our response to the climate emergency. I think we still need to work towards a better understanding of what inclusive growth is, because we've got to sort of have some notion of growth, not always about the constant demand to buy stuff or buy more cars, and also we need a notion of decoupling car usage from car ownership. I think that's really important, that we need to have the dialogue with citizens about when is it appropriate to use a car in a conurbation. Because I was interested in the slides at the end about the engagement with citizens, and David's correct comment that people are apprehensive when they're told they won't be able to use their cars. And I think we need to say to people that with the levels of investment that continental cities have had, it's possible to have a densely integrated network in a conurbation, and say light rail going out to the surrounding areas. And if you think of a big city like Munich, it's got an integrated network, and then it's got the S-Bahn going out to semi-rural areas on the periphery. So what we're talking about is not unachievable. It's just to do with policy decisions and the level of investment that are made. So I think it's a great document, but we're going to be trying to deliver it in exceptionally difficult times. And I do think we need to have continue the discussion about inclusive growth, because I'm not clear that we all mean the same thing when we're talking about it.
Thanks, Lee. David, is there any last comments you want to pick up on that?
No, I agree. Yes, inclusive growth is it means different things to different people, but the CA has adopted quite a clear approach to it, and we're trying to sort of factor that in as we sort of develop the new local transport plan. And again, that whole the sensitivity around car use, car ownership is something we're going to have to explore, and I think that's where the deliberative engagement will come to its fore, really, to help us have some of those more difficult conversations.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope that the comments from the committee have helped to shape the document going forward. And I think I'd just like to make stress the point really about public engagement, and also about elected member engagement in each Met, because every councillors will in different wards have a very different feel about the plan and the deliverability of it. So I think that wider engagement will be critical going forward.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I can move on, then we move on to item number 6 on the agenda, and that's Claire Williams to present the Emergency Active Travel Fund update. Claire, is it possible to keep your presentation to no more than 20 minutes?
Yeah, no problem, Chair, absolutely. So I've come back to give you an update on the Emergency Active Travel Fund. So hopefully you'll find the notes that I sent to you a useful update. It is an early look at some of the outcomes that we've seen from the fund. So just to point out that we're still working on gathering, monitoring and evaluation, and a formal report will follow. But in any case, we have delivered now on the Tranche 1 projects, 57 separate infrastructure projects across the region, so in all of the local authorities. And we have also delivered wraparound activities to activate the infrastructure, such as comms and lots of activities such as training, working with businesses, working in schools, etc. And we've also, as I alluded to, we've also done quite a thorough monitoring and evaluation piece on Tranche 1. Even though that wasn't required of us from the DFT, we thought that it would be important in order to demonstrate the benefits that these schemes have brought to our communities. So there's some details in the paper, and I'll be happy to take any questions, but I'll just take you through it briefly. You will note that on the Tranche 1 schemes, the delivery of the schemes are mainly done by local authorities, and you'll see that we have seen some real great successes with some of the schemes. We've also seen stakeholder engagement feedback, meaning that some of the schemes were amended and updated, which is absolutely what we would expect to see in an emergency situation. So they were, changed and made better as the time went on. We also saw local stakeholder engagement, meaning that one scheme was removed and several other schemes didn't go ahead as they weren't viable. And I think that's important to note, not necessarily a failure, but just to demonstrate that you do need to consult with local people, which I think I've just sort of caught the tail end of the section before. And that's going to be really, really important to us as we move forward. You'll see there's a few results from a survey that we conducted, which shows generally a lot of support for the schemes, and in the appendix we've provided some further data which shows you the sentiment, both positive and negative, that we were able to collect online through our Commonplace portal. So I mentioned that we delivered the infrastructure projects. Many of you will be aware of them, and I'm sure you've seen them and used them, hopefully. But we also delivered a supporting measures package. And within the paper and the appendix, you'll see that we delivered activities to literally thousands of people in different settings. There's a few that are picked up throughout the paper. One of them was Park That Bike. So lots of organisations, businesses, schools, community groups took advantage of free cycle parking, which is now dotted throughout the region. And also some local authorities also use the fund to deliver cycle parking in their own public areas. So that has been really successful and really popular. If we just move over onto tranche 2, so we have been waiting, as you know, for an announcement from government. We received that on Friday the 13th, so a couple of weeks ago, and we were really pleased to have been allocated just over £13 million to carry on doing some of the work on the Active Travel Fund. So all of the local authorities have put forward their schemes, and we will be delivering those between now and the end of March 2022. So we've been given a bit of an extension based on what the original fund was set up for, due to the delays in getting the announcement out of government. But nevertheless, we will push forward and push on. And I think tranche 1 taught us that we can deliver quickly, and we will carry on with that in mind. One thing that is really important is that we have got new mandated requirements to consult with people, with local people. So this isn't an emergency, let's get them in as quick as we can situation like it was in tranche 1. This is about making decisions and putting facilities in place for people with them being consulted, engaged, and indeed, co-producing as we go on. So we've got a consultation and evaluation plan, which we have to publish by the 11th of December. So we're just putting the final touches to that. What that will mean is that we will be consulting with a range of stakeholders, including local councillors, including MPs, and also, the usual stakeholders, but DFT have been very clear that they would like to see engagement in particular with the emergency services and with people such as Royal Mail. So we will do that, and we will ensure that we are speaking with all relevant stakeholders and calling on your support really in order to help us to do that, in order to get to the people that we need to speak to. So the next step really is that we will be publishing our plan, and we can expect receipt of the funding from government just before Christmas, at which point it then gets distributed to the local authorities, and then we get on with delivering the project. And just, I suppose, a final word on that is that we will then, shortly after that, start turning our attentions to the future and into future rounds of funding and our long-term ambition of getting more people cycling and walking. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire, for that presentation. That's a quick run through the reports. I've got a couple of questions I'd like to put to you. So the mandated requirement to consult in the spend in tranche 2, has the majority of that is the consultation mandated by for the CA to carry that out, or is it for the local authorities to carry that out? And obviously the plans went in from each local authority for tranche 2 plans. I'm not aware, or I've not seen any consultations on those. I mean, I know the plans have gone out and they've gone in, but I'm not aware of the consultation process that took place for those.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so the consultation plans are expected from each local authority, and then we, as the CA, are expected to publish the overarching plan and to bring an element of regionality into the plan. We have a portal which is where all of the schemes and the designs and the plans have been put. That is the Commonplace portal, so we can share the link. If the local authorities haven't already got their tranche 2 schemes up, they will be up very shortly, very soon. And hopefully you will be able to engage with that, and certainly the general public will be able to engage with that. As well as that, we're going to have some more targeted engagement. Us as the CA will definitely be doing that, as well as the local authorities too. And just to note as well, you asked about the schemes that went into the application and how they got there. The schemes are largely linked to the West Midlands Cycling and Walking Network Plan. I don't know if you know the acronym. It's called the LCWIP, which is basically a document that we've worked on for several years. So the schemes are part of our pipeline, and are not sort of randomly put together. So they are part of the Strategic Cycle Network. But I am really keen to strengthen links with this group, and if there's anything I can do to make sure that you know this information and that you've got the ability to input into it, then I'd like to do that, please.
I think that would be very welcome. And I'd also want to, just a question really, very quick one from me. So we understand the purpose of this money, and we understand why it was given. Were local, and I accept that it was that all the schemes have got to be linked to the cycling and walking plan. Do you feel that that local authorities have either been creative enough or gone far enough in their ambitions with the plans they've put forward?
I think it's fair to say that we have got a really great set of ambitions regionally. I think that is, when I speak to the DFT, they do see the West Midlands as having ambition. I think it is varying, if I'm completely honest, and that different local authorities are at a different stage in their journey towards really championing active travel. But having said that, I've worked in cycling for a long time, and I've never ever seen so much ambition and so much drive and passion that I've seen in the last 18 months towards this agenda. So yeah, people are on a different sort of line towards that, but I think we are getting there, and things like this funding can only help us to move forward.
Thanks, Claire. So I'll move now to the committee questions, and I've got Councillor Clements followed by Councillor Taylor. So Councillor Clements.
Thanks very much, Claire. And I just wanted to say at the beginning, I know how much work officers have put into this, and at great speed. And certainly in Birmingham, I know that that people have been working all the hours God sends, really, and have done a really good job. And I think the consultation and engagement on this is very difficult. But I think the first tranche, particularly had very, very challenging deadlines, and it was all about an emergency response and to create safe and socially distanced cycling and walking. So I really welcome this and congratulate everybody who's involved. And in Birmingham, we were building on an existing transport plan. We were consulting in the beginning of this year on a transport plan which is all focused on reallocating road space and looking at how we can reduce the numbers of short car journeys by single occupancy vehicles. So really, the measures that were taken under the emergency transport plan in Birmingham weren't surprises. They were things that we would have done anyway. But this, in a way, COVID brought the timescale for them forward, and really very few good things have come out of this pandemic. We've had terrible tragedy and losses of life, but in terms of the way that it's made us rethink how we travel and the nature of mobility, particularly in Birmingham, I think that's possibly one of the few positive things that's come out of it. And I think, certainly in my ward, just thinking about it parochially, I've got 2 transport filters which have caused a lot of controversy, but the Commonplace site has been very, very active. So we've had over 500 comments on those 2 schemes, and so I think that's been quite a good way of getting people to give us their views during the pandemic, because obviously a lot of the things that we would have done, like local meetings and site visits, we've either can't do them at all or it's been very, very constrained. And I think we do need to, we're talking about the need for more consultation, and in the second phase we need to consult in advance. So for example, in my area, we're hoping to move towards a much wider area-wide low traffic neighbourhood, and for that we need to have structured consultation and engage a much greater range of people so that everyone feels that they've had a chance to get involved. But we also need to explain to people that in the first phase we were using those experimental traffic regulation orders which allow you to move fast and do things and do the consultation alongside them. So we were doing what the government had urged us to do. So I think a lot of people have said to me that they feel that that this was a conspiracy theory to bring in unwanted measures, and I think we need to keep reinforcing that it was something that the government was urging the whole country to work on, and we were making use of the tools that were there within legislation. And in the second phase, it must be different. But my experience over the last couple of years of various other transport schemes in my area, like controlled parking zones, various traffic calming measures, and other issues that have become difficult. We've gone through the standard TRO process, and a lot of the schemes just have not moved forward because there's been a small number of persistent objectors who don't like the outlines of the scheme. So the majority of the residents who did want something to change have never seen that change. So I think there's something about striking a balance here. And from my perspective, the fact that for example, the pop-up bus lanes in Sultan Coldfield really were there for a few weeks and then removed, that's not a good development, because I think we didn't have enough time there to see whether they worked and whether they would actually promote a mode shift, because the point of all of these schemes is to try and get people to think about leaving their cars at home for short local journeys. We're not saying that everyone has to do a 25-mile cycle ride to go to work. We're saying if you can go and do some shopping or do a local errand, or go, when you're able to see your family, go and visit them on your bike with your kids because it's safe and pleasant to do so. Please think about doing that. We're not saying make unrealistic changes. We're talking about starting to make small steps to change the number of car journeys or reduce the number of car journeys. So I just think that this has been a really positive development. I thank all the officers who are involved, and I think we do owe our own residents much more consultation in the second phase. But we've also got to continue to be bold and not lose our nerve at the first vocal opposition. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I very much appreciate what Councillor Clements has just said about being bold. My question to Claire is with regards to disadvantaged groups, and this sounds very paradoxical. Has people got their people muted themselves because I can hear feedback? This is a very paradoxical question to be asking you, Claire, but it's really about how cheap is cycling. I don't come from the disadvantaged groups where I can't, purchase a bike, but I've been looking for an electric bike for months. The cheapest being £500, the most expensive being £1,000. So, electric bikes aside, how can disadvantaged groups access cheap bikes, and how can we encourage these groups to actually cycle? Will we give them vouchers, or what is the plan? And how can I get a good electric bike? Cheaper than £500.
Thanks, Jackie. Claire, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Okay, so yeah, bike ownership we know is a problem. We've got statistics that tell us that there are many people who do not have access to a working bike. So there's a range of things that are currently available across the region. The one that we coordinate is the Cycling UK's Big Bike Revival. So working with community groups to, literally get out their old bikes out the shed, dust them down, and we will provide an officer. Many of you will probably know that person in your local area who will help the person to fix them up. So that's one such initiative. We've also got, brilliant local projects. Brushstroke, Samwell. I know they've got some really great ways of collecting in old bikes and then giving them out to those who need them. We've got the bike shed in Wolverhampton. We've got loads of absolutely fantastic work going over in Birmingham with the Active Wellbeing Society. And there are loads of others. So, maybe we could do better at coordinating that and communicating that out to people. So I could take that back as an action. And then as a region, we will have our cycle hire scheme that is coming soon. And I'm really keen that we can look at how we enable all members of the community to access that scheme. So looking at subsidies and free hires and things like that. I don't know if you know of the Workwise scheme. We look after that in our team as well, where we give job seekers access to public transport tickets at a 50% discount. We're going to be looking at something similar with the cycle hire scheme, because we want all of our communities to be able to access the benefits that it will bring. And there will be some e-bikes on the cycle hire scheme, Councillor Taylor. So hopefully we can get you out and about and having a look at what we've got there. I think we do also on our website keep a directory of all the local bike shops to signpost people to as well. And then for people who are in employment, there is the Cycle to Work scheme, which perhaps I'm talking about a different audience, granted, but this is for people who could access a tax-free bikes, that are paid for out of your salary before tax and national insurance. So there are a range of, things going on. We've also got some loan bikes in different communities. I know in Birmingham they've got some really great sort of literally containers where members of the public can go and use them and perhaps even hire them, and also NHS staff borrowing bikes to get to work during the pandemic as well. So Yeah, lots going on, and lots to still do, and lots to perhaps to communicate as well.
Thanks, Claire. I'm just seeing a comment from Councillor Clements. Do we have an actual date for when the bike hire scheme is starting?
Okay, so the cycle hire scheme should be started to roll out in the spring of next year. And yeah, so I could, bring back some more details if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be very helpful for people to understand that. And I think just to comment further on the Emergency Active Travel Fund tranches 1 and tranche 2, I think it also gives local authorities an opportunity to do some linked scrutiny. So I think it gives them the opportunity in their own authority to undertake scrutiny of the particular schemes that are in their authorities, and linking that then to the wider CA and to all of the initiatives that are being supported and rolled out. And that's certainly something we're going to be suggesting is undertaken in Dudley, looking at the spend on tranche 1 and the plan for tranche 2, and does that actually meet the need. So if I'm not seeing any other questions from anybody, thank you very much. And that report was just for noting. So thanks very much. If you could share the links to the various schemes that you've talked about, I think that would be helpful. And I think, again, if we may well want, even if it's just an update paper when on tranche, the spending on tranche 2.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. So that moves us on then to item number 7 and regional road safety progress. Who's taking this item? I've got Anne and Mark.
Yeah, it's just myself, Councillor Baton. Mark's not able to join us today.
Okay, that's fine. So if I hand over to yourself then, Anne, if we could keep the presentation to perhaps no more than 20 minutes to allow questions.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just whiz through. So there was 4 items in the pack that were sent out to you. The Regional Road Safety Strategy itself, along with a briefing note and a report through to the Scrutiny Committee. So road safety is the responsibility of a number of organisations. So we've got shared responsibilities between all of the local authorities, the combined authority, West Midlands Police and also the fire service as well. And we have some really good regional collaboration in terms of delivering road safety initiatives around the region. And that's supported by a group of officers within each of those organisations, professionals in road safety and carrying out their statutory duties under the Road Traffic Act of 1988. So in 2019, the Combined Authority adopted the Regional Road Safety Strategy. This reaffirmed the target of reducing our killed and seriously injured by 40% by 2028. And that was based on a baseline figure in 2015-17. So we know that accidents on our roads have devastating effect on our communities, those who are involved in particular, and particularly where families lose a loved one, and then also those who may end up living with long-term life-changing injuries as well. In addition to that, accidents do also have some financial consequences, not least on our emergency services that are supporting people through those incidents. And the DFT has actually calculated that £2.1 million is the cost of a fatal injury nationally as well. And then again, based on those 2015 figures, nationally, 444 million was lost to road safety accidents. So further, road safety also results in congestion during those incidents and the management of those as well. But as we've just heard through David's presentation and also the presentation on cycling, it also acts as a barrier to people taking up more active modes as well. So really important that we keep our roads safe, and particularly now as we're trying to encourage more sustainable journeys and encourage more and more people to walk and cycle on our highway network. So what progress have we made since 2015 and 17? Since adopting the road safety strategy, we've set up a new strategic partnership This oversees the work of the Road Safety Officer Group and reports into the Combined Authority. It's chaired by the Road Safety Foundation, which is a charitable trust, and also includes wider representation from not just the strategic level of the local authorities, police and fire service, but also colleagues from National Health Service, Public Health England, the Young Combined Authority and other road safety campaign groups as well. In terms of progress, since that baseline figure, we have reduced our killed and seriously injured by 8% per 100,000 of the population. In real terms, it's about 6% in terms of the pure statistic. And the priorities that we've set out in the Regional Road Safety Strategy were focused around pedestrians, particularly around young pedestrians, cyclists and drivers, and again, particularly around young drivers as well. And our aims are to make sure that we're keeping our roads safe. We're encouraging safer vehicles on our highway network. We're keeping safe speeds as well. And also making sure that our post-crash response, we're supporting families that are affected by those incidents. So the various agencies have delivered, and in one of the papers you will see some of the measures that they've done. So engineering is where we've improved the highway network, and also not just on existing infrastructure, but also making sure good design in new infrastructure as it gets delivered. Education as well is something that we make sure through various campaigns, so such as West Midlands Police Close Pass for cyclists, where they're encouraging car drivers to give at least 1.5 metres as they pass a cyclist on the highway network. And then, of course, enforcement. So average speed cameras that we've seen rolled out across the region, as well as mobile speed camera devices with the police. And we're also using new and emerging technologies through our ANPR partnership with the police as well, so that we can see where we've got hotspots that we can sort of do wider enforcement on. So the work of the strategic partnership will provide leadership and guide the delivery of the various interventions. It's established in its priorities, which is focused around the 5 key pillars that are contained within the road safety strategy, and the action plan and commitments that are being developed by the officer group and reporting into that strategic partnership. One of the priorities that they have is about data and evidence led on interventions, so that can support an understanding of a deeper causation of those fatalities in particular, and that helps us to deliver suitable interventions by the most appropriate method. So the action plan commitments are set around those themes again, so education through targeting campaigns, working with schools and communities and encouraging safe driving, enforcement through those average speed cameras. We've seen other measures around 20-mile-per-hour zones in our local communities, and then also some specific measures around schools as well that we've seen with some of our local authorities. Some of the other things that we're looking towards is how can we make best use of new powers, so things like moving traffic offences, how can we use that to make sure that we're being even more targeted around keeping our road network safe. The other side to it is data management. So again, I've mentioned those deep dives and how we're making sure that we're using all of the data and intelligence that we've got, not just from across the traditional highway data, but also working with colleagues in Public Health England as well to look at those more preventative things. Engineering, I've mentioned in terms of how we invest in our network. How we're making sure that roads assessments are made on those roads, and of course, as we're encouraging more cycling infrastructure into our highway network, how are we making sure that those are safe and removing some of those barriers that prevents people from taking up cycling. The other measures that we've got in the action plan are around legislation. So what new legislation or what additional powers could we have as local authorities in order to sort of achieve more? Looking at construction standards as well, making sure that things are delivered in the right way. And then other initiatives such as the partnership that we've got with Highways England, looking at things like driving for better businesses. And that's encouraging businesses to sort of keep their drivers safe and ensuring that they're complying with road safety guidelines at all times. And then we've got wider supporting measures as well in terms of education campaigns and so on. One of the issues that we do face is funding. Funding is limited when it comes to road safety interventions. Each authority has its own capital and revenue resources, and it sets its priorities based on what funding is available. It is constrained by other budgetary pressures as well. And so whilst we're on target with our reduction that we're seeing already in killed and seriously injured, I think if we had access to broader funding, it would enable us to deliver more outcomes as well. So that, again, it just goes back to looking at ways in which we can create those new sustainable sources of funding. What additional powers could we have? What levies could we put in place with the ability for us to retain fines for those people who break the law and reinvest those in road safety initiatives as well. And that's something that obviously we'll be looking at as part of the government white paper, devolution and levelling up, which I think you also mentioned at the beginning of the meeting as well, just to make sure that we're able to sort of sustain and improve our road safety conditions here and keep to that target that we've set. I think that's it, Councillor Clements. So just ready for, sorry, Councillor Baton. So ready for any questions.
Thanks very much. So I've got a couple of people indicating they want to speak, but I'd just like to just kick off the KSI target reduction of 40% by 2028. That seems a pretty stiff ask when we think that in the first 3 years of it being set, we've only managed a 6% reduction. So I think it's just, you know, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute the target isn't correct, but how are the facilities that or the plan that you've got at the moment, is that going to deliver that reduction in the time frame that you've allowed?
Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting one for us to observe. In some countries, they are now moving more towards zero as well. And obviously with the refresh of our transport plan, as David took you through earlier, it's probably one of the things that we do need to review. The original 40% target was introduced as part of the transport plan that David is refreshing. So we probably need to look at how we will make sure that we can deliver, if not just on that 40% reduction target, but also trying to sort of bring ourselves towards zero reduction as well.
Okay, thank you. So I've got Councillor Hawkins, followed by Councillor Clements, Councillor Taylor and Cashmere. So Councillor Hawkins first.
Yeah, thank you for this, Anne. This area is it's a big area for me. Some might know that I used to be a police officer and a traffic officer, an accident investigator as well. And really, we've reached a stage where a lot of our accidents now, well, I still call them accidents, I know let's call them collisions. A lot of design for both vehicles and our network has helped deliver great savings in the number of injuries. I think it's education now is a big issue, because it's still a case of 2/3 of accident collisions are caused by some element of carelessness, whether it's dangerous or speed. So it's that education of that we really must concentrate on. And then followed by the enforcement aspect of it. And I don't think we have got it right in relation to speed cameras. Average speed cameras seem to work. A lot the next tranche of average speed cameras actually to have some sort of mobility set into them, because static speed cameras only deal with the issue in that location, and we need to be able to move them around. And even though some of my former police colleagues might not like this, I don't think enforcement of speeding should be left to the police now. I think it's a case of that we should have these regulations and legislation brought in so local authorities can actually enforce some of these things. I know people say we need to be a police officer. Well, you don't, because handheld radar and some of the camera operators for decades have been civilians anyway, with proper training. And also I want to mention we're focusing a lot on safer walking and cycling. Now, I've got to be careful how I phrase this actually, but the correlation is that the more and more people we have cycling on our networks, the likelihood we're going to have more accidents. And cycling, that might bring about more serious accidents, serious injuries. So we need to ensure that what cycling and walking provision we make is absolutely safe. Because of that, because once there are more collisions, people will shy away from cycling. So more more education and better designed mobile average speed cameras.
Thanks, Ken. Is there any sort of initial comments, Anne, you want to respond to on that?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Councillor Hawkins has just said. Most of our highway engineers would suggest that designing out problems has probably come to its end as they've picked up on those locations. Education and enforcement are the big things that we want to sort of focus on as well. We do have access to West Midlands Police mobile enforcement vehicles, and they do operations across the region. They do that jointly with the local authorities as well, sort of picking up on where those hotspots are. We are looking at rolling out more average speed enforcement cameras, but as Councillor Hawkins quite rightly said, they are fixed in those locations, but they do have good impact. And again, we work with West Midlands Police in terms of the back office management of those as well. Education is something that we really need to think about. Again, this is where we are constrained by the finances that we've got available to us in terms of how we do that. But we are, as I've mentioned, we will be responding to the government's white paper on devolution and those moving traffic contraventions or moving traffic offences and what powers can be conferred back to local authorities is something that we will be picking up on. So definitely we'll be welcoming his views on those as well, given his past experience.
Thanks very much. So I've got Councillor Clements next. Liz.
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Anne, for the presentation. Very interesting and comprehensive as always. I mean, I have a slightly different perspective to Kathy, maybe, because obviously a lot of road safety campaigners are campaigning on the Vision Zero platform, so for zero killed or seriously injured on our roads. And I know that, for example, the Greater London Authority, that's the basis of their road safety strategy. And obviously, you know, you've given us the 6% reduction figure, but it wouldn't if we're looking at refreshing this or looking at the plan that David's working on, shouldn't we be heading towards Vision Zero? And certainly I know that in Birmingham there are a lot of campaigners who are urging the council to sign up to that. And I suppose just in response to Ken, Councillor Hawkins' concerns about, you know, that if you increase the number of cyclists on the road, you're going to get more accidents. But surely the whole point of what we're doing is to try and encourage people to choose to cycle and walk and leave their cars at home. You know, so that we have more journeys, particularly in local neighbourhoods, that can effectively done by able-bodied people on their bikes. They're done by bikes, so that people don't need to take their cars out. And as a ward councillor, you know, I am inundated in my area with people asking for physical traffic calming, it's engineering traffic calming, and this, you know, the council just does not have the budget for those. So I'm very interested in the campaign for blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in residential areas. You know, and Birmingham again, you know, wrote and asked for that power in Birmingham earlier in the year at the beginning of the pandemic, and that wasn't accepted by government. But I'd just be interested in what Anne thinks of the likelihood of, you know, of a change of heart there at national level, and because I'm aware of, you know, of a national campaign in Wales to move towards blanket 20-mile-an-hour zones in residential areas. You know, do you think we have a chance of getting that in England? Thanks very much.
Anne, do you want to come back on particularly that last point?
Yeah, so on the last point, I think the ability to do blanket 20 mile per hour just requires a change in the legislation. And then that would be a huge sort of national campaign where 20 miles per hour would be the default speed. So it comes with quite a bit of work in order to do that. The alternative at the moment is obviously you have to introduce traffic regulation in order to take that speed down to 20 mile an hour. But it is some of the outputs or outcomes from where those have occurred. It is showing that there have been improvements in road safety in those locations as well. So it does merit, a longer term strategy around how we roll that out across the region. On the other points, on the cyclists being introduced, we did carve out as part of the activation measures within tranche 1, and we've also submitted within tranche 2 some road safety funding, which gives us the ability to do some education pieces around that, working with West Midlands Police to support new cyclists onto the network as well. So we are tackling that as we sort of transition with more cyclists and people ultimately leaving their cars at home. We will inevitably have to have that sort of transition period where we're being really mindful about how we manage that. And then just again, back on the Vision Zero point, it is something that we will be discussing through as we refresh the transport plan.
Thanks very much for that. I've got Jackie, Kashmir and then Phil, and I want to tie up this part of the agenda by 20 past at the latest, because we do have still the forward plan and some items to discuss on that. So if I can take Jackie next, then Kashmir and then Phil. Jackie?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just make this really brief. And thanks for your presentation. I'm minded to think again about it from an equality perspective, that we seem to have missed out our citizens that have got low or no vision. I'm thinking about pavement parking and the dangers of pavement parking and what that does for our citizens that haven't got vision, older, frail people that actually has to come off the pavement and go into the road. Just wondered what your thoughts were about that, Anne.
No, I agree with you on that as well. And certainly I think the consultation's just closed, which local authorities have been responding to on powers, again, being conferred back to local authorities in order to enforce pavement parking. It's quite a mixed economy of how parking on pavements is enforced. So if there's traffic regulation orders, then it's the local authority. If not, then it tends to be the police. So certainly the response to that pavement parking consultation, and ultimately where government are looking for that to be more locally managed, I think will help that. I think there's probably a number of equality issues that we need to pick up as part of the road safety strategy as well, particularly for some of our more disadvantaged communities as well. I think we tend to see that there are more issues around there, and that's something that we do need to target. The deeper dive that we're doing on some of the data will help us sort of pick out some of those equality issues and be more focused and targeted around those as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Kashmir. Kashmir, I think are you muted?
I think he's actually left the call. I can't see him on the call.
No, I can't.
Oh, he's just come back, I think.
Oh. Kashmir?
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
I don't know what happened there. Good old technology. But thank you for that, Anne. It was a very, I think it said the progress. I think the progress which is being made, I think genuinely is positive. It is good to have seen figures of fatalities come down. I certainly would agree, though, that 40%. I think is it's bold, it's ambitious, it's good, it's ambitious, but I'm not maybe in the sense that there's still so much to do that it's probably one of those which does need to be thought about. I definitely would agree in terms of Jackie's point. I have my mother is officially registered blind, partially sighted, and I can't imagine what it ever feels like for her whenever she has to try and go around, say, a pavement which has such a narrow gap. and definitely hope that consultation nationally and the recommendation and stuff reflect it. And obviously, I think the big and I must say as well that the interventions, I think, as showed in the presentation, I think some of the interventions are definitely, again, good steps and stuff in the right direction. And the only real question I have is in terms of the adjusting and the refresh of it is. How is COVID going to affect it, knowing that road usage on the whole has plummeted since March, and even within the second lockdown here in England, that again usage has, I think, has markedly went down once the Prime Minister made his announcement. But it's good to be involved in the group as well, and look forward to February's meeting.
Thank you, Kashmir.
So
I'll just pick up on the point that Kashmir made around COVID. So one of the sort of side things that we've seen is actually an increase in speeds on our roads as traffic volumes have been lower, and that does cause us some cause for concern as part of that as well. We have seen traffic levels creep back up, not to the full levels as they were pre-COVID, but certainly disproportionately in compared to public transport journeys as well. So we are seeing more people and probably people who drive less frequently now more frequently on our roads as well. So again, we're really mindful that there will be some consequences around how people are using the highway network during this pandemic and post this pandemic.
Thanks. Phil, your hand's gone. Do you still wish to contribute?
Just a quick question. With regard to the budgets that's being spent in the West Midlands conurbation for road safety, how does that compare to the combined authorities in the other areas in terms of the overall number of schemes that take place and the money that's being spent by the authorities? I'm looking for a benchmark comment, really. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say I can't give you an answer on a benchmark with the other authorities, but that's probably something that we should do, and we can report back to you on that as well. Most of the budgets that are spent on road safety come from the various organisations that are involved, so either the local authorities, police, etc. The combined authorities budget itself, other than the major capital projects which are delivering and should be adhering to good design, etc., to design out any sort of road safety issues, there is limited funding to deal with the enforcement or the education side of things as well. So we're looking at ways in which we can sort of increase that through those conferring those powers and any sort of funding that comes with that to the combined authority and through to the local authorities. But it's probably a good question to ask, and it's something that we will go away and we will just benchmark ourselves against those other combined authorities.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. I think that's really quite helpful. Jackie, last quick question.
I'll just quickly going back to my original question, Chair, just to ask Anne. My question about people with regards to pavement parking, can that not be added into this document at all, just to show that there was some consideration about that?
Yeah, absolutely, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for your questioning, and thanks Anne for your presentation. Again, the report was for noting, and we note the range of activities delivered by partners across the West Midlands to date. I think it's also worth making note of the very specific points that have been raised during today's meeting. So around additional powers on speed limits, around additional stroke use of funding, a benchmark comparison to other combined authorities, the issues that have been raised around equality, and the target reduction of, initially set at 40%. Is 40% still the right target given the refresh that's taking place on the plan, and whether or not, and also sort of some comments around the progress on that and the pace at which progress needs to happen. So I think all of the committee's comments have been useful, and hopefully they can feed into to that report, and we'll have an update from yourself when we've got the did you say the white paper from the government?
Yeah, that's due sometime next year.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right, we now move on then to the forward plan, and I'm going to hand over to Lindsay to take us through the forward plan, and then we'll have a discussion around the mayoral Q&A. So, Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair. So within your pack, you would have received the forward plan for the WMCA board. And what we have done is highlighted those reports specifically relating to transport. I think this was a request following the last meeting. We also have our forward plan for this subcommittee. So the last meeting will take place on the 22nd of February for this municipal year. And there's 2 items looking at the Commonwealth Games and transport around that. And also we have a Q&A with Councillor Kath Hartley, who is the chair of the Transport Delivery Committee. And then there are a couple of items going into the next municipal year, which you can see within the document. So I'm happy to take any questions on the current forward plan.
Any questions from anybody? The only comment, Lindsay, I've got around is the when we're talking about doing the deep dive into the alternative ticketing policies that came out of the transport portfolios Q&A. I can see it's in for the following municipal year. I just wonder if we have any capacity to try to undertake it during this municipal year, or whether that's been a bit ambitious.
It would be totally dependent on members' time. I think officer-wise, we would be able to accommodate members. But yeah, it's a decision of the committee, really, Chair, and yourself. And also transport officers, if it's doable.
Okay, so maybe Phil and I can have an offline conversation about the feasibility of that, and then we can make some sort of email decision.
Yeah.
Okay, Liz.
Yeah, it's just to say, Kathy, I can see that on the forward plan for the board decision papers that the budget's coming in January. And I don't know what else, how many other meetings there are for the budget, but based on what we were briefed about on Friday in the private briefing, I just think the budget environment for transport seems to be very difficult at the moment, and I suppose I'd just like to know that that we're going to be informed about any further decision making and deliberations that the board are doing about particularly the concessionary transport schemes, in the light of all the discussions that we've had about equalities, and access to transport today.
Okay, thanks, Liz. I mean, that probably takes us quite neatly on then to the mayoral Q&A, which is actually on the budget. So as you referenced, Liz, we did have a briefing last week for those people who were able to attend, and that briefing from Linda and Louise covered the whole of the budget, so the transport element as well as the general element. Now we've got the mayoral Q&A on the budget with a specific time slot for transport members to ask transport related budgetary questions on the 11th. So because there are a number of people who were unable to attend that, bear in mind it is going to be difficult to fit it in, I guess, but I just wonder whether or not people would value a little bit of a briefing from Linda and Louise on the financial challenges and the financial issues around the budget process before the meeting with Andy Street, just so that they feel better informed to ask questions. Liz, what would your view on that be? Do you think that would be valuable? I know you attended, but given what you heard, do you think there would be a value in a specific transport up briefing?
I think it would be helpful if people have got time for it, because I was certainly very concerned about what I heard in terms of the budget shortfalls that we've got, and the risks and some of the choices that are going to confront the board members, because I know that that officers are looking at what are the statutory responsibilities of the combined authority in relation to transport, and what are the things that are discretionary and things that we've chosen to do, and many of those policies are precisely the ones about equalities and ensuring that everyone has equal access to transport. So I think it would be helpful. And again, I think some of the material that's contained in Ian Ward's response about the difference in the concessionary fare schemes already between, say, London and the other metropolitan authorities is already quite shocking, really. Maybe as I said on Friday, maybe I'm a bit naive, but I didn't realise that in London that children already had free bus travel, whereas our concessionary scheme has always been half-price bus travel. So if there's any discussion about levelling up, and future funding, then we ought to be possibly being more challenging in our expectations of what can be done on concessionary fares. But really, the reality is that the battle may be on to actually save them.
Phil, any comment you want to make?
Just a very quick one. Yes, please.
Right, that was really quick. Okay then, so if we could, Linda and Louise, if we could set up a perhaps just a 45-minute transport finance briefing in advance of the 11th. I mean, I can suggest some times now that I can do as chair. How do you want to move forward with that? Do you want to do that via me offline, or Linda?
Yeah, if you want to give us the dates that you can do, Councillor Bateman, and then I'll pick that up with Lindsay to get it in. Okay, so I can do any time on the 2nd.
I can do any time on the 2nd.
Morning of the 4th. And morning of the 9th.
I think the 4th would be the very best, to be honest.
The morning of the 4th
would be probably the most optimum for me.
Okay. How does that work for officers? Or do you want to come back and confirm?
Let me come back and confirm if that's all right. So I can just so I can make sure I can align and get somebody from transport there as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Liz, right. Is that a new hand or from your previous comment?
So I think that's a legacy hand, so sorry.
Okay. Jackie?
But just to say, I'd like to be included in that as well, Chair, please.
Yeah, of course, it'll go out to everybody. Once we've got the date, it'll go out to everyone. And just to say how the mayoral meeting will run is we have an hour and a half for general questions on budget. If transport scrutiny members want to ask a question on the more general topics, please ensure they have a transport element attached to them. So it might be, if there's something around inclusive growth or development, please link it to a transport element. And then there will be a specific half an hour for the more detailed transport questions on the day. So I do think that the finance briefing will help people inform those questions. Lindsay, is there anything you need to come back on or add to?
No, I think everything's covered, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so that leaves me just to conclude the meeting and thank everybody for their attendance. I will look forward to seeing you all at the briefing and then at the mayoral Q&A on the 11th. And yeah, so thanks everybody. And the next formal meeting of this committee will now take place